Let's talk about keyframing tips and tricks for Premiere Pro. This video isn't meant to be an intro on how to keyframe in Premiere Pro. It just turns out that within the last month or so, I've picked up on a bunch of techniques that I had no idea existed inside Premiere Pro as an editor. So hopefully there's something in here for everybody. Let's dive right in. Let's look at this first situation. I'm gonna do a simple push-in, which is a keyframe on both ends of the clip, something that might happen for anyone, right? I want to adjust that last keyframe. If I hit go to next keyframe, it automatically goes to the next clip. And I try and bring my playhead over and it goes to the next clip again. It actually jumps so far ahead. Well, this is because a feature is on called selection follows playhead. If I go up to sequence and here's selection follows playhead, it is checked off. I've created a keyboard shortcut D for it. That's not default. You would have to create your own for that. But if I turn this off, now when I go to next keyframe, it will go to the next clip on the program monitor, but it does keep that clip up in my effects controls window because it stays highlighted, therefore allowing me to adjust this keyframe however I need to. So if you ever find yourself in that situation, remember to make sure that selection follows playhead is either on or off. Next, let's talk about a somewhat similar situation where you have the two keyframes on both sides of the clip and you manipulate the in and the out past where those keyframes are. So they're basically on the sides of the clip where they're in the abyss. They're on the beginning and ending, but you can't see them because they're past your ins and outs. So what I used to do in a situation like this is move the clip up one layer, then go find those keyframes somewhere past those endpoints and drag them so where I could see them. But there is a much easier way and it's called pin to clip. If you highlight the clip and then go up to the effects controls menu, at the very bottom is something called pin to clip. You uncheck that and now our clip is unpinned from the effects controls window. And I can effectively zoom out and find those keyframes throughout the entire timeline. I can click and drag these back into the area where the clip is and manipulate them as such. Or if I do have selection follows playhead off, I can move the keyframe to wherever I want to inside the timeline and adjust it wherever it needs to go. Super useful feature. Next, let me talk about the add or remove keyframe hotkey. Let's say I want to add or remove keyframes on the fly. So for something like this, I want to do it with the scale. And if you go to your keyboard shortcuts and look for add remove, there are two options, add remove audio keyframe and add remove video keyframe. For me, I've set this up as Shift plus U. You do need to set up your own. There are no default keyboard shortcuts for this one. With that in mind, by default, if I were to scrub along right here and hit Shift U, it will automatically create keyframes on the opacity. And personally, I don't find this very useful because I don't really keyframe the opacity unless I'm fading in and fading out. But other than that, I don't really need to utilize it for the opacity. So the way that you dictate what gets a keyframe is this little effects button right here. Right click and you can switch it to any of those parameters. So I'll switch it to scale. And now when I move along, I can create keyframes for my scale. And now I can just go in and adjust that accordingly. One thing I do wish was a part of Premiere Pro, and if it is, please let me know in the comments down below, is the ability to automatically set keyframes for something like position or scale, rotation. Any of those, I wish there was like a hotkey to automatically toggle on animation for that and then just start manipulating that. But as it stands right now, I don't believe there is a hotkey for that. And now that I have those scale keyframes, I also want to adjust the positioning at those points as well. And here's where I would like a keyboard shortcut for go to next keyframe. I believe there is one for After Effects, but I don't think there's one for Premiere Pro. Obviously you can hit those arrows next to the little keyframe button, but it would just be nice to have a hotkey for go to next keyframe so I wouldn't have to scroll. The best alternative I can think of that isn't those arrows is to hold shift while you're scrolling the effects controls window. This will snap the playhead to the keyframes as you scroll past them. Now let me briefly touch on how to ease in and ease out instead of just doing a linear movement. On the screen, we have two simple objects. And with this top square, I want to ease out and ease into the beginning and ending keyframe. To see a graph representation of what you're doing, with any of the parameters, if you go to the little arrow and drop it down, that will expand the velocity parameters. I'm going to highlight both keyframes, and for this first one, I'll right click, go to temporal interpolation, and ease out. And the reason for that is because I'm easing out of the movement. It's starting and it's easing out. For this second one, I'll right click, temporal interpolation, ease in, and you can see the curve now and how they arrive at the same time, but one is speeding up, getting ahead, and then slowing right down, whereas the other is linear the whole way across. Now you can take these handles and move them however you want to manipulate the velocity at which these are used. And if you can't see what you're doing, don't forget that you can click and make this space bigger right here. Now, instead of right clicking and finding ease in and ease out, that does take some time, you can assign those to a hotkey. So inside your keyboard shortcuts, just look up ease in, scroll on down to keyframe, temporal interpolation, ease in, ease out. Mine is on comma and period. You can put yours on whichever, but now if I were to highlight both of these on the circle and just hit comma and period, it will ease in and ease out automatically for me. Now, one concept of keyframing that confused me for a while was the difference between Bezier, auto Bezier, and continuous Bezier. If you want to know the differences between those, let me give you a visual. Here we have that purple square, and I'm just going to create some keyframes to move it around the program monitor. If you notice when I hit play, instead of it going straight from one spot to the next, it kind of goes on curved lines. It goes outside the box. And if I click on the shape layer in the effects controls panel, we now see the path at which this square is taking, and it's not a straight triangle. And even though my temporal interpolation is linear, my spatial interpolation is auto Bezier. And this is the setting by default whenever you create keyframes like this. Now, if I were to manipulate any of the handles on these keyframes like this, it will automatically switch from auto Bezier to continuous Bezier. Think of auto Bezier as the first initial setting that Premiere Pro will apply to all of your keyframes if you don't manipulate any of them. But the moment I start adjusting any of the handles of any specific keyframe, it will switch from auto Bezier to continuous Bezier. Those two are almost the same. It's just whenever you manipulate the handles, it will manipulate both sides of the handle. If you just want to manipulate one side, this is when it turns from continuous Bezier to just straight Bezier. So when I do straight Bezier, I am only manipulating one side of the path. If I wanted to create a straight line from point A to point B to point C, so on and so forth, I would highlight all of these. I wouldn't do any Beziers, and I would just do spatial interpolation as linear. Now, the last tip I want to talk about is one that I just saw in a video from Premiere Gal, and it blew my mind that I didn't know about this earlier, since it's been a part of Premiere Pro since I think 2019, and that's responsive design. So right here, I've animated on my social handle to come from the top and then go back out to the top. And what responsive design does is allow you to pull these handles right here at the top to create kind of protected regions that will stay the same no matter how long or short you make a clip. So if I extend this out, the beginning animation stays the same and it travels with my endpoint. If I take this and extend it all the way out to the end, the animation stays the same, and everything in between, it will hold that title on the screen until it animates out. This way, you don't have to manipulate and create a whole bunch of different keyframes. Now, an example more complex is with this like and subscribe animation that I did with a bunch of different shapes and a bunch of different keyframing. Here I create my responsive design intro and outro, and I can move the ins and outs to wherever I want to, but the animation will always stay the same, and I can make it as long as I want to stay on the frame as long as I want. It's super powerful stuff, and I didn't realize that you could also translate this, and I feel like this was built for After Effects. So I built that same subscribe animation inside After Effects to convert it to a Mogurt that was much easier to work with. And you can use responsive design inside After Effects. So I have all of these keyframes in my intro, and then I have some outro keyframes. And if you're curious on how to do this in After Effects, just go up to Help, do Add Marker, add your marker to the timeline, right-click the marker, and then go to Enable Protected Region. So now I can move this around and I could make this the intro protected spot or the outro, but now this marker acts the same as those intro and outro that I showed you inside Premiere Pro. If I go over here to my Essential Graphics and look up subscribe, here I have that animation. All I need to do is bring in my profile picture and I can adjust the framing and the scale however I want to. I'll undo that, close it out. Here's how it looks. I can also make it shorter, or I can make it as long as I want, but those animations stay the same speed as long as you don't make it short enough to the point where the keyframes are on top of each other. If you're curious, this is one of the very first Mogurts that I've made. It's available on my website. If you're a YouTuber and you're looking to have a sleek looking subscribe and like button animation, this is available on my website. I'll put the link to it in the description below. I hope there were some tips in here that really helped you when it comes to keyframing inside Premiere Pro, and I guess also with After Effects a little bit too, because the idea that you can make Mogurts with this responsive design really helps out. Until next time, my name's Javier Mercedes, and I hope you're out there living a life of abundance.